All right, welcome to the next Gren Twigs video. In this one, I'm going to take you from zero, just an empty directory, to a full stack working Gren web application that talks to a database. To do that, I'm going to use my pretty nice Gren web framework. The only requirement is you have Node.js installed. If you do, you should be able to follow along 100% with this. And in an empty directory, if you run npx pretty nice init, it will turn that directory into a project that has a client folder holding the Gren browser application that runs client side, and the server folder, which has your server side Gren web server. It also gives you a dev server, which runs on port 3000. Let's see what that looks like. It's just a website with a button. Great. Okay. I'm going to keep track of my windows here by giving them names. So that's the server. This will be Vim. Now, I'm going to go into the server folder, this main module here. This is where all your requests are going to go through. There's a router function, and the project generator sets this up this way, but you can architect your site however you want. We're going to be interested in this view home function, which is spitting out some HTML for the root path. And I'm going to replace what's currently on the home page with a list of to-do items. So this is going to be like a to-do MVC, but we'll probably just get as far as reading the to-dos from a database. To start, I'm going to make a new type alias for my to-dos. It's going to be a record that has, we'll say it has a done status, and each to-do has a name that's a string. Now, in our view home function, to start, we're going to hard code a list of to-dos, but eventually we'll swap that out with pulling them from a database. So for now, I'll say I have one done task to drink coffee. And I have well, I said it was done, and then I wrote false. We have a not done task to make a video. All right, now we should be able to update our view home function now so that it receives that array of to-dos. And we'll get rid of this stuff and say, whoops, we'll say, what will we say? If I can use Vim correctly, wow, there we go. Then we'll say that this is my to-do list. In my to-do list, I'm gonna have, let's make it an actual list. No attributes for that. But for each item, I'm going to delegate to another function that says called view to do. All right, for each one of those to do items, we're going to turn a to do into some HTML. All right, what's that HTML look like? Well, it's going to be a list item. Again, no attributes. We'll say if it's done, then it'll be just a strike through. I think that's the S element. You might want to do this with CSS. I don't know. This is how I'm doing it for the video. And it'll just have the name of the to-do crossed out. Otherwise, it'll just be the name. All right, that should get us there. Let's see if we're still compiling. We are, and my website now has my to-do list. Great. So let's update this to pull to-dos from a database. Now, the database story in Gren is not where we want it to be yet. We can't talk to sqlite directly. We can't work over a TCP socket. So we can't talk to like a database server that uses TCP like MySQL or Postgres or pretty much all of them. However, there is a thing that a tool that I really like called WS for SQL. That lets you run a SQLite database server, but the protocol is HTTP, and we have a HTTP client in Gren, so that means we can use SQLite with pure Gren. We don't need ports or anything like that. It has an npm installer, so you can install it like this, and then you can run a server. So I mean, there's help. You can check out all the details for running a server. You can check the site, the repo docs, and all that. But I am just gonna do use this flag called quickdb. That will create a database file with the name that we give it. If it doesn't exist, it'll use it if it does exist. And then start a server with all of the default options, which I think for this video is good enough. All right, we should have a database now. We might want, let's see, we'll say that this window is WS for SQL. Then we might want some migrations or put some Gren code in there to create our tables, but for this video, I'm just gonna do that right in the database. I'm gonna make a table called to-dos. It's gonna have that done field, which is gonna be a Boolean. The SQLite doesn't have a direct Boolean type, but it understands certain things as Booleans. And for our purposes, we're gonna use integers and have 0 be false, 1 be true. And a name, which is text. And let's put a couple to-dos in there. So done name, we'll say we have a one done task, and we'll just call it db to do one. I think it wants single quotes for that. And another one that's not done, db to do two. All right. Now we have a database. We have some values in the database. We can go back to our code. And so we could just make HTTP requests directly. However, I have a package that gives you a nice API for talking to WS for SQL. Since we're talking server side, we need to install that to the server application in our pretty nice project. So we hop into that server directory. That's a Gren project where we can install this package. It is called Blake's Gren WS for SQL. Great. Now, that gives us this DB module. It also gives us a DB encoders and decoders. We're only going to need the decoder. I'll get to that in a second. We're going to need a few other things that I'm just going to go ahead and import now before I forget. I'll explain why we need them soon. We're going to need the HTTP client, and we're going to need the init module. Okay. Again, we're not going to use the HTTP client directly. I'll show you why we need it in a second. Actually, I'll show you why we need it right now. Why we need it is in Gren, you can't, if you have a package that communicates over a network, or it talks to the file system, or anything like that, that's expanding beyond the scope of just your running code, then you need to give that package permission to do so. So to give our package permission to talk WS for SQL, we're going to need to give it permission to use the HTTP client. To do that, we have to call HTTP client.initialize. That will give us the permission value that we need to pass on to our DB module. And that's why we imported init, because this is a init task, which is a Gren node specific thing. So we await that task, and it gives us a permission value that we can use to initialize a handle to our database, which we're going to store on the model, so that we can make calls to the database in our router or wherever else we need. We can just pass in this connection. All right, to make that connection, we call a function in the DB module called init. We give it that permission value, and we give it the URL of our server, which is running over here in window 2. It's on port 12321. We're going to use localhost 12321, and then the name of our database, which I think we called it to-dos. Yes, we did, but without the .db extension. I should actually do this correctly. There we go. All right, let's just make sure we're still compiling. We are. Now that we have our database handle, we can actually get the to-dos from the database. To do that, I'm going to make a function called get to-dos. It's going to take that connection and it's going to return a task with a potential database error, but on success, it will be an array of to-dos. All right. So there's various ways you can look at the docs to see details, but there's various ways you can query a database with this package. Since we want to get a list of rows, then we want a function called getAll. That's going to need your connection value and take a array where one of the fields is your query. And we want to get the done field and the name field from to-dos. Another is parameters, an array of parameters. So if you have like where ID equals whatever, you can pass in values encoded safely via that field. We don't need that for this query though. We do need a decoder. Now, our decoder needs to, we're interested in two fields, done and name. So the function we want is called getTo. And the first field we're interested in is a Boolean, and that field is coming back with the name done. The second field we're interested in is a string with the name. So those are our two fields, and those are going to get passed into a function that we pass here. And we can return whatever we need from this function. And what we need is an actual to-do value, which has a done field and a name field. Okay. If we did that correctly, we should still be compiling. We're not. I forgot to close my parentheses. Now we're good again. We should be able to now use this function to get our array of to-dos instead of hard coding them. So we want to get to-do. We have to pass in that database connection. Now that gives us a task. And that task is going to have an array of to-dos, and we need to turn that array of to-dos into a response. So we can call task dot and then, which will give us our to-dos. Within that task, we can do what we were already doing, but instead of hard coding the to-dos, we'll just pass them in. Now, you can see here that we can't just return a task that resolves to a response and could have an error, and this function could have a database error. So we need to handle that error by creating another response that will return if we have a problem with our database. For that, we want on error. And we're just gonna do, we'll say that, I think set status is the function we want. We'll see if the compiler complains at us. And we'll say it's gonna be a text response that for now just returns the error value. And I will tell you, the package we're using, the error messages are currently terrible. You're going to get a confusing error about JSON, but I am currently working on that, and the next major version, which should be releasing soon, will have much better error messages. So for now, let's hope we don't get an error and have to deal with that. And we always have to return a task from this stuff. So there we go. Let's see if that compiles. Get to do is not what I called it. What did I call it? I called it get to do's. All right, and we are now compiling. Let's see what that looks like. There's our list of to-dos from the database. Let's go back to the database and we'll add another one, to-do 3. And refresh, there's to-do 3. All right, we have a full stack working Gren application talking to a database. There's a lot more we can do. Maybe I'll follow up with some additions in further videos, but in the meantime, you can check out Gren WS for SQL on GitHub. And I used the Pretty Nice framework. That's, excuse me, Blakes.prettynice. And that should let you take this as far as you want. Good luck, have fun, make something weird and cool.